Good morning, folks. If you could send me a note in the chat box that you can hear me, we're going to get started. Yahoo! All right, that was quick. Thank you. So good morning, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Tracy Ganyu, Community Resource Developer on the Community Food Systems team for the Oregon Food Bank. Our team is focused on developing and supporting a network of food system advocates across the state of Oregon through the Feast Leadership Network. One of the ways we support our Feast communities is through these quarterly webinars on topics that you said you'd like to learn more about. Today we're going to dive into our community organizing process by walking you through a bill we drafted for the 2015 legislative session. We hope you'll leave this webinar with some tricks and insights into creating food systems change in your communities. So before we get started, housekeeping items, if you could keep yourself muted, that would be great. And then if you have any questions during this webinar, feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll be monitoring that. And we will have a couple of opportunities today to answer a few questions that you may have. So I'm going to advance the slide here and we're going to look at our agenda. So we're going to cover some organizing basics. We'll go over how a bill becomes a law. We'll talk about the groundwork kind of organizing we did for the home baking bill. Then we'll use the home baking bill as a case study, and then we'll talk about what happens once a bill passes, and we'll end with some Q&A. And our speakers today are all from the Oregon Food Bank, and I have the great pleasure to introduce my colleagues. Annalise Kohler is a public policy advocate for Oregon Food Bank working on anti-hunger and anti-poverty policies and programs. She works at both the local and state levels and advances policies and programs that address hunger and its root causes. She believes that hunger is solvable, but that it will take all parts of our society, including government, to find the solutions. She also sits on the Welcome Home Steering Committee and is a member of the TriMet Equity Advisory Committee. We also have Spencer Masterson today. He is the Community Food Systems Manager at Oregon Food Bank. In this role, he leads a team of community organizers working statewide to conduct community food assessments, host Feast community organizing events, and provides technical assistance and support to organizations throughout the state working to develop local food systems. He is a member of the leadership team for the Oregon Statewide Community Food Systems Network and is the president of the Oregon Farmers Market Association Board. Amy Watts-Padilla is a community engagement coordinator with the Oregon Food Bank's Advocacy Department. She works to activate a statewide network to weigh in on issues of public policy by providing opportunities for people to connect with their legislators on issues related to hunger and its root causes. Amy loves strategically galvanizing people power and enjoys community building necessary for effective organizing. And Amy will start us off today with some organizing basics. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, we just wanted to clarify the way we'll be using some basic terms and concepts. And we thought we'd start with defining a few terms for the purpose of this webinar, starting with lobbying and organizing. So first, lobbying, the way that we're defining it is communicating with elected officials to encourage them to take action for or against specific legislation. So the key is on specific legislation. For example, you might talk to your legislator about how you are deeply concerned about the issue of hunger, but that's not lobbying in and of itself. It would be once you say, please vote yes or no, or for or against a specific proposal, is when it would then cross into what we would call lobbying. Some of you may wonder if it's just folks who do this on a professional level or who are paid that we could call their activities lobbying. And actually that's not true. Average people can engage in lobbying activities. This definition is for both the lay lobbyer and the professional lobbyer alike.
So folks, we're having a hard time advancing the slides, so know that we are on it. Thanks for those of you who have mentioned that. Amy's going to keep rolling, but we will try to figure this out on the back end. Sorry for that.
So next, in terms of when we talk about organizing, what we mean by that is the process of building the people power to influence elected officials to take specific action. So oftentimes when we're thinking about organizing, we think about people coming together, organizations coming together, communities coming together to act in their shared interest. And it could be that the community or organizations have come together to address a problem that they all feel impacted by or that they would be impacted by. And so they want to do something about it. So in this case, lobbying could be maybe just one person, but organizing, we would say, would definitely be more than one person coming together. And in this webinar, we're talking about public policy organizing specifically, although organizing can take place outside of the political arena. So now when we talk about where change could happen, kind of thinking about organizing or lobbying public policy change, obviously changes can take place at the local level, the state level, or the federal level. And so a question that you would want to ask yourself as you may be organizing on issues that are affecting your community is kind of who has the decision-making power over the problem that you want to address. So that would kind of lead you of whether you're really looking at a local organizing effort, a state organizing effort, or maybe even a federal one. So this can be sometimes difficult to assess, or sometimes it might be unclear. So for example, often in our work here at Oregon Food Bank, one big issue like hunger needs to be addressed or can be addressed at each level of government. So for example, first thinking federally, obviously the SNAP or that's the new term for the food stamp program, or something like the WIC program is definitely regulated at the federal level. But then when you think about the state level, obviously changes can happen at the state level that would affect hunger. A recent example is that the state legislature enacted a bill such that reduced price school lunches for low-income districts would now move toward being completely free. So that's an example on the state level that could impact hunger. And then at the local level, we're here in Portland, and there was the passage of something called the Children's Levy, and that utilizes taxpayer money to support food pantries specifically located at schools. So, the issue of childhood hunger, for example, you could look at the WIC program at the federal level, the free school lunch program that the state acted to enhance, and then the Children's Levy, which supports pantries specifically at schools, as all addressing a problem of childhood hunger. So your group, being concerned about whatever issue it is that you're concerned about, may need to ask yourself, where do you have the greatest influence, or what's one small policy solution or change that you could start with in trying to decide where you want to focus your organizing or lobbying efforts. Also, this is just kind of a caveat here, but change can obviously also happen outside of the political realm. And, an example of that might be trying to influence a farmer's market to change a practice. So that could involve using the principles of organizing to get vendors together to talk about their challenges and approach the head of the farmer's market. Or maybe there's a store, a local store that you want to source more locally. And so maybe you organize frequent shoppers there because the decision makers at the store would probably care about what their customer base wants or thinks, or if they may take their business elsewhere. So just to let you know, the principles of organizing that we'll be talking about today can definitely happen inside or outside the political process, but mainly for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to be talking about political organizing. So, thinking for a very simple flow chart, you may start by asking an elected official to take action for or against specific legislation. And with that simple request, if he or she says, yes, I will certainly do that, then congratulations. A few things may have aligned there. Maybe your interests aligned with the decision makers, or your group already had enough sufficient influence, or the person was swayed by your argument immediately. So congratulations, you have participated in the political process, and your first ask was sufficient. But if, on the other hand, you ask an elected official to take action for or against a specific legislation or proposal, and he or she maybe says no outright, or maybe just doesn't really respond at all, positively or negatively, so you're not quite sure where they still might be standing, then I would say it's time to organize, because you need to gain or demonstrate more power. Now, the issue of power. So some people think this is kind of, a bad word, or why would you want to have power over someone? That sounds oppressive. But in the way that we're talking about it, we're kind of talking about the special kind of people power that would move someone to do something that just may not be in their original plan or priorities as an elected official. Doesn't mean that that person is necessarily opposed at their core, but maybe they just don't quite have the kind of push they need to get that to the top of their priority list. So in fact, organizing and building kind of power from the ground up, or grassroots power, is definitely part of our democratic system, and a great way for us to hold our elected officials accountable to their constituents, and frankly, just informed about what you, your neighbors, or your groups think and care about. So now, just some kind of basics. There are many, many tactics that one could utilize in an organizing campaign. Just wanted to give folks a wide range of ideas. So, initially, someone might think of really high-level tactics like marches or strikes, or kind of the most visible forms. But oftentimes, we start with much simpler tactics at the beginning, and then one, gets kind of stronger and stronger along the way to demonstrate the people power. So some examples, we have personal visits. So obviously those are kind of face-to-face meetings with whatever elected official you're trying to convince. We also have letter writing. This could be actual letters, or it could be sending postcards. You see a picture here demonstrating a delivery of some postcards during a campaign. There's phone calls. That could be individuals making phone calls. It could be coordinated call-in days or call-in weeks to try to echo certain messaging to an official. Emails. These could come in the kind of mass action alert systems, or it could just be folks coordinating personal emails. Testimony. You'll be hearing about that a bit later on in our webinar, but that could be at a hearing or at a public gathering. Media, so trying to generate media for your cause. That could be social media, which is quite useful these days, or it could be, submitting an op-ed or getting the newspaper to come out and cover what you're working on. And then obviously there are events, so kind of the big things we think of, like lobby days, rallies, community forums, etc. And there are many, many more tactics, but those are just a sampling. So oftentimes it's to your advantage to think of things that can be fun for your group to engage in, even though many of the topics you may care about have a serious message attached to them. And also just want you to think about this. Sometimes it doesn't take a ton of people engaging in tactics in order to make a really big impact. So it could be that 5 or 10 calls to an elected official, if it's on the local or state level, could have a really big impact and all of a sudden get an issue on their radar. And next, something to really just kind of hold at the center of what you're doing in your efforts or your organizing tactics is making sure that you are creating space for voices to be heard from those most affected by the issue. I heard in a training one time, and I really liked it, that if you don't tell your story, then someone else will. So don't let others frame the issue or communicate about it in such a way that there's a void from your groups not chiming in, or people most affected by the issue not having the space to be heard from. So that's just kind of one of a kind of a checkpoint along the way for you to make sure that you're telling the story of your group, and also making sure that people most impacted are held at the center. Okay, and finally, depending on if you're affiliated with a 501c3 nonprofit, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a second, can we even do any of this that you are describing? So you can breathe a sigh of relief. The short answer is yes, there are some limitations. And a big limitation is, for example, that a 501c3 can never support or oppose a candidate. So, thinking more election politics realm. So you'd want to steer clear of that, if it's a 501c3. But you can advocate for or against policies or proposals. And there are some limitations on that, but I would encourage folks to talk to their supervisors or board if you have specific concerns. But there are some limitations that just say that no substantial part of a charity's activities could be focused on this kind of lobbying efforts where it's for or against specific policies or proposals. But it's also important, I mentioned this kind of at the beginning of my time, but to differentiate between time spent with an elected official and when that is not actually lobbying. So oftentimes it's not. There's many topical conversations, educating a member on a concern, and it's just when you get into that realm of advocating for specific action for or against legislation or proposal that you then step into the lobbying realm. So that was kind of a very cursory overlook, and want to pass now to Annalisa Curler, who is one of our public policy advocates at Oregon Food Bank, who's going to pick it up from here.
Hi, everyone. So like Amy said, my name is Annalisa Curler, and I am a public policy advocate with Oregon Food Bank. I've got a slide up that says how a bill becomes a law, and let's just say I spend a lot of time at various points on this slide getting policy passed at both the state and local level. So one just really large caveat, this is how a bill becomes a law in the Oregon State Legislature. So different states have different processes. The federal level might be a little different as well. So just want to make sure that that is the frame for this slide. So first of all, there needs to be some sort of a problem or an issue that's been identified. And then the really big next question is there actually a policy solution for that? Is that the solution that makes the most sense? Obviously, there's a lot of issues that are out there, and sometimes policy, government action is absolutely the right way to go, and sometimes it's not. As you can see, there's a lot of steps, and it can be a lift to get policy passed, so you definitely want to make sure that the policy solution is the right solution. So let's say you've got a problem, you've got a policy solution, an idea for how to change it. The next step is to find a bill sponsor. So at the Oregon State legislative level, government officials or state legislators and whatnot are the folks that are able to introduce legislation. So you need to contact a state legislator in order to get a bill introduced. We recommend that you maybe start with your own legislator. Legislators are very interested in what their constituents have to say, and so it will be a very easy ask or an easy way for you to get a sponsor is to start with your own legislator. You can just call their offices. There's a staffer there whose job is to talk to all constituents and kind of talk through your idea. If the legislator thinks it's a good idea, then they will hopefully likely sponsor your bill. Then once you have a bill sponsor, you essentially have a legislator who's agreed to get that bill drafted and written up. There are a set of folks down in the state legislature whose job it is to sit and write bills and write the language and write the legalese for all of that. And so that process gets started. And then once all bills are kind of drafted and you have something, depending on, so if your bill sponsor is in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, it will go to that appropriate chamber first, and the leader of that chamber, be it the Senate president or the speaker, will then refer it to a committee. So the legislature has a series of different committees for each chamber that are divided up by topic. So that would be like natural resources, human services, ways and means, and other types of committees like that. And 5 to 6, say more than that, legislators serve on each of those committees. And so oftentimes when a bill gets drafted, it then will then get referred to a committee, and it will get referred to a committee that makes the most sense. So if you have a bill that has to do with foster care, then your bill will likely get referred to a human services committee, and so on and so forth. So once it gets referred to the committee, then you will want to work with the committee chair in order to get a public hearing and a work session. So public hearings is kind of the first step in a committee, and that is where a bill gets really heard. It's where proponents and opponents can offer their input. They get to testify why they think the bill is a good idea or why they think it's a bad idea. It's a time to talk about amendments or changes to the bill and discuss maybe why you think those changes should happen. Oftentimes the sponsors of the bill, legislators, and then if you or whoever else is kind of interested, will create a panel at the beginning that will kind of walk through the bill and why you think it's important and those kinds of things. Then the next step is a work session, and a work session is distinctively different than a public hearing. This is where the panel of legislators themselves discuss the bill publicly. So at this point, there's not really an option for public comment, although legislators may invite you up themselves. There isn't the kind of free-for-all where anyone can offer input on the bill. This is also the moment where legislators vote on whether or not they think the bill should pass out. It's a moment where amendments get adopted or not adopted. So those are really the two big pieces of what happens in committee. And every bill that goes to the legislature has to have a public hearing, and it has to have a work session. If it doesn't get one or either of those, the bill is dead. So at the end of a work session, committee members, legislators, will hopefully vote your bill out, and then it heads to what we call the floor. The floor is the full vote of the entire of that entire chamber. So if you're in the House of Representatives, all House of Representatives legislators would vote. If you're in the Senate, all Senate members would vote. And so you'll want to do some lobbying for all of the members to vote positively for your bill. That is another moment in which, unfortunately, your bill can die. So if you don't have a majority of legislators voting in favor of your bill, then it doesn't pass. But assuming it passes, it then moves on to the second chamber or the other chamber. So if you were in the House of Representatives, you then move on to the Senate. If you were in the Senate, you move on to the House of Representatives, and then you go through that exact same process again. So the leader of that chamber will refer it to a subsequent committee. You will work with your committee chair to schedule and hold a public hearing where anyone and everyone can testify in support or in opposition of your bill. There will then need to be a separate work session where legislators get to discuss the bill and then vote in favor or in opposition. And then it would head to the floor if it passes out of committee, another floor vote, and then assuming that that goes smoothly and you get the majority that you need, it heads to the governor's desk. And at that time, hopefully governor signs the bill, and then your bill becomes a law.
Awesome. Thank you both for that great background on organizing and how a bill becomes a law. We do have just a few minutes for a couple of questions. If anyone would like to clear anything that has been brought up so far around organizing or lawmaking. We do have one question for you, Amy. Someone has asked, can a 501c3 support or oppose a ballot measure? Is it only lobbying if it's a public official? And what about advocating to the public for votes for or against a measure?
Great question. So thank you so much. That is definitely relevant to this season. I feel like, especially in Oregon, we're just starting to hear murmurs about ballot measures, and I'm sure that's the case if anyone's on the line from another state. So yes, 501c3 can engage in ballot measure organizing. If Annalisa wants to jump in and say anything, but yes, so I would say that's definitely allowed. Just a reminder, not so when folks go to the ballot, looking at ballot questions, things like that. Ballot measures are okay. Again, not for or against candidates, so that part's kind of out. But yes, on ballot measures, and it would just be, I think, along the same restrictions. So first and foremost, I would say talk to your boards what policies they have in place, or if they have legal counsel that more specifically looks at what those limitations are in terms of amount of time or amount of money that your specific 501c3 can dedicate to those kind of organizing for or against a ballot measure initiative. Anyone want to chime in with anything else? Okay, thanks for the question.
All right, I don't see any other questions at the moment. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so if you have questions, feel free to chat them in now or at the end, and we will hope to address them. I'm going to pass it off to Spencer now, who is going to introduce the home baking bill and how that came up. It's going to take me a second to advance the slide, but rest assured it will come.
All right, thanks, Tracy. So now I'm going to go through an example of one of the bills that we've worked on in the 2015 session in Oregon to, and sort of provide like a real world example of how this process played out. So for those of you who joined us at our last webinar, we had it on the FEAST community organizing model. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that now, but if you are interested in learning more, I think we do have a recording of that webinar on our website, OregonFoodBank.org. But FEAST is basically what Oregon Food Bank provides is an opportunity for communities to identify challenges in their local food system and come up with some solutions for how they want to address those challenges. And what our role, Oregon Food Bank's role, is really just to provide the facilitation, support, and the format and structure. But we don't come with any predetermined ideas or say, this is an issue we want community members to work on. Instead, we're there to listen and to support whatever comes up at these events. And so I think to emphasize here as part of this process is really engaging the whole community. So not just working with staff of organizations or just with food banks, but really trying to get everyone in the community who has an interest in the food system or is interested in improving their local food system to come together and come up with identifying challenges and then also working towards some solutions. So that's one of our organizing models, and that's kind of the ethos behind how we do our work. And so within that program, some topics that usually come up are things like farmers needing more opportunities to sell or wanting new markets, consumers wanting to purchase local food year-round or wanting to have different types of food available, people wanting to share knowledge and skills around nutrition and cooking and gardening. Grocery stores, an issue in Oregon and most of rural America that we hear a lot of is challenges within grocery stores, rural grocery stores, and getting product delivered to their store and challenges around that. And then also from folks that, where food isn't available or accessible or affordable. So those are some kind of general ideas that often come up at these feast events. And so to get on that one point, mostly what we focus on is what communities are interested in is in implementing programs or, to address the market issue for farmers, helping to start a farmer's market. But every now and again, we do hear things that are related to public policy and wanting to try to change a policy or some challenges that are related to policies. And so over the years, what we heard in many rural communities was that that grocery stores and folks had difficulty accessing bread products. So it was hard to get them delivered to the grocery store, or the products that were delivered were maybe just your standard white bread, and that was it. There wasn't much quality bread products going into these communities. And so we were hearing from consumers saying that, this is hard for us to access, hearing from store owners saying, well, we can't get distributions to our stores. So that's why you're not seeing it. And then at the same time, we were hearing from people that were interested in starting little food businesses where they could sell products like bread or other baked goods. And so hearing this enough from a number of different communities, we start to say, well, this is an idea that has some legs, and maybe there is a policy solution to allowing people to produce bread in their homes with trying to eliminate some of the barriers to allowing them to produce bread in their homes and be able to sell in their communities. So seeing it as a way of increasing access to these bread products and also allowing folks to sell it. And so that's kind of the where the home baking bill came from, is hearing that there were these challenges and that there was a potential solution that could be a policy solution to address this. And so from there, I took that information and said, okay, let me do some research into what exactly would a bill look like that would increase access to baked goods, and also allowing people to sell. And one thing we heard from people that were trying to sell was that the permitting and startup costs of licensing and registering with the Department of Ag was prohibited some. And we're talking about pretty small micro entrepreneurs that are looking just to sell a little bit on the weekends at the farmers markets, but didn't want to go through the whole hassle. They're not necessarily at this point looking to start a large bread business that would be selling into grocery stores. These are smaller micro entrepreneurs that just want to provide some supplemental income and support their community. And so we kept hearing that these costs were prohibitive. And so we looked into other states and what other states were looking at in terms of cottage food laws. I'm sure many people have heard of what a cottage food law is, but essentially it's to allow it. They are focused on eliminating or reducing some of the requirements to selling goods that are of low risk. And states all over the country have different cottage food laws. So for this one, we knew we were looking for something that was just specific to baked products. So we were looking for a win-win policy solution that reduced the barriers for selling home baked goods and also increased access to these products in rural areas. And some things that I was looking into was what are allowable products under these cottage food laws, specifically around baked products. So there is a definition of non-potentially hazardous foods, which I learned a lot about, and it's a jargony. Well, there is a definition, but it sounds crazy. But non-potentially hazardous foods are make it easier to reduce some of the requirements for selling food products. So in Oregon, you need to produce, for most products, you need to produce in a commercial facility that is licensed and inspected by the Department of Ag. But there are states that are working through state legislatures to reduce that need to produce in a licensed and inspected facility for certain low risk products like bread products. Pretty much the only food safety concerns with certain baked goods that don't include creams or custards or dairy or meats or fruits is norovirus and toxoplasmosis, which are spread through dirty hands. So just washing your hands is one way to address those. So most cottage food laws only allow low risk products. Another thing that I found was that sales were restricted, so not wanting to have a large bakery business running out of a small home kitchen, which would be hard anyways, but most cottage food laws have a limit on sales, and so looking at like that limit, until then you have to move into a certified facility. And then also looking at what marketing channels are allowable. And so mostly with cottage food laws, they're direct marketing is allowed. So farmers markets, farm stands, or selling from your house. You move into retail or consignment, and then it makes sense that you would then need to get another level of inspection or working out of a certified facility. So I just kind of looked at other states for ideas. Also looking into the Oregon statute and what the rules were around Oregon laws regarding baked products cooked at home. And we have a domestic home kitchen license in Oregon, which you can get for a fee and an inspection from ODA. You can produce certain food products in your home and sell those. But what we were hearing was that domestic kitchen license was a barrier for some of the that are just trying to start small businesses around baked goods. And so was looking through that statute and seeing what it said there. We also have another cottage food law that was passed in 2011 called the Farm Direct Bill. And what this allows is for farmers to sell certain low-risk products direct to consumers. And the purpose of that bill was really to provide another marketing opportunity for farmers. So that was another one. It doesn't relate to non-farmers. So you had to, under the Farm Direct Bill, you had to produce the primary ingredient to be able to sell that under that bill. So those were looking at what the Oregon statute currently says. And then going back to those folks that we heard that this was a challenge or that they were interested in selling baked goods, and asking them about, okay, you know, with these products, is this what you're interested in? Does this total sales amount seem reasonable to you? What are the other barriers or challenges that that we could possibly address with a policy solution? And just making sure to, you know, talk to the folks most directly affected by the bill, or by the challenges that the bill was supposed to address, to make sure that we hit all the things that they were interested in. And so that's kind of the background of getting to the home bakery bill idea. And then I'll pass it off to Annalisa, who's going to talk about the process through the legislature.
Thank you, Spencer. So if you remember back from the original How a Bill Becomes a Law slide, Spencer just kind of walked through problem identified and should there be a policy solution or not. And with the home baking bill, after doing some really great research, we realized, yes, there absolutely is a policy solution. So next step on that slide is bill sponsor. So I had talked about earlier that talking to your legislator specifically to be a bill sponsor is a great first strategy, and it is. And I would also say that in addition to that, having as many sponsors as possible is a really good strategy. There are two kinds of sponsors in Oregon. There is a chief sponsor, and that's folks who are going to, or legislators who are really going to advocate for this. They're going to get the bill drafted. They're going to probably testify in favor of it. They'll probably testify on the floor, those types of things. And then there's something called regular sponsors, which are just folks who are saying, legislators who are saying, yes, I like this idea. I want to do this. We should do this, etc. Overall strategy is to get the most sponsors as possible, because you're already starting to kind of build support in the building, build support for your policy idea. And then in addition to that, we really recommend, if possible, to make it a bipartisan bill. So that's to have both Republicans and Democrats signed on as sponsors to your bill. It just means that things will typically move a little bit easier. You won't get caught up in partisan politics and those types of things. And then kind of a third strategy is, when you're thinking about your sponsors, really think about who are folks, who are legislators that whose communities would directly benefit from this policy change. So the home baking bill we really saw as a way for rural communities to get access to baked goods. So we, for our first kind of round of sponsorships, really tried to target rural legislators. So the three folks that you're seeing up on your slide right now are Senator Hansel, Senator Roblin, and Senator Thompson. And Senator Hansel is from Eastern Oregon, and he's a Republican. Senator Roblin is from the coast, and he's a Democrat. And Senator Thompson is from Hood River, and he's a Republican. So this is very much bipartisan support. It's from communities, more rural communities, the coast, Eastern Oregon, Columbia area, all areas that are a little more rural, more likely to benefit from this bill. And then in addition to that, the home baking bill had also 25 regular sponsors, and that was we had an even mix of Republicans and Democrats, and we actually had some urban legislators sign on as well. So after you get your bill sponsors, and then you end up having, we had Senator Hansel and Senator Roblin together request that the bill get written, and it got drafted. And then I'm going to turn it over to Spencer to discuss some of the ground game tactics that we were putting into place while the bill was getting written.
Great, thanks, Annalisa. So, yeah, Amy mentioned a lot of these in her slides around organizing, but just wanted to run through, what we did in terms of the ground game to garner support for the bill. Now that we had a bill and a specific piece of legislation that we could go back to our communities and say, okay, here, this is what we heard from you, and now help us to get this passed. And so we did letters of support. We had both an individual and an organizational letter of support. So we had many organizations throughout the state that we work with that are doing food systems development work. Reached out to them to see if they could sign on as an organization, and then also to ask them to pass along information about the bill to their constituents. And then we also did individual sign-ons, so asking individuals, they didn't have to be representatives of an organization, but if they were just supportive of this bill, to sign on as an individual. So we had both organizations and individuals. We also sent out information to get people to sign up to these letters of support, but also action alerts through our listserv. We have a listserv in Oregon called Food for Oregon. If you are in Oregon and not on that, just Google Food for Oregon, you can get signed up. This email list was not created for this specific bill, but instead it's been something that we've been building over the last, 10 years or so, as a tool that can be used for sharing information about resources or new articles or grant opportunities. And then also when there are legislative policy changes that are of interest to food systems advocates in Oregon, we were able to just send this out to a group of people that was already ready and willing to respond to a request like this. So we used our listserv through our network of partners, including regional food banks and also community food systems organizations, asking them to reach out to their constituents. We also, at any event or events that we had, we would make announcements about the bill, but also events that we were just attending or maybe tabling at. We had information about the bill. We would also, at any opportunity, try to make an announcement to the whole group. So there was a couple big events here in Oregon, the Local Food Connection. Sharon Thornberry from Oregon Food Bank, she made an announcement about it and then had people ask us questions. So really just trying to get the word out that there is this bill, and if you're interested in supporting it, this is the way you can. And with certain people, we had an opportunity to call their legislators. So with those action alerts, it could either just sending an email to their representative or senator. We used Salsa Labs, which is the software that Oregon Food Bank uses for action alerts. Also encouraging people to call their legislators. And in a few cases, there was, say, a committee chair that was maybe crucial to getting this bill, as Annalisa described. There's many points along the way where a bill can get hung up. So targeting our supporters that we know of in a certain area that are constituents of the committee chair, getting them to call in to make sure they know about this, to make sure that the committee chair knows about this bill. Also, if there are committee members who maybe we're not sure if they're supportive or not, we could go and find people that were in that committee member's district and say, hey, this person or your representative or senator we're not sure if they're supportive or not, you should just let them know about this bill. So that was kind of the ground game that we put in. And I would just say another thing I would add as far as I know we got a question about this beforehand, is timeline. So the process of coming up with the idea and turning it into a bill, that was over many years. We kept hearing about this issue, and then, before the session started, several months before the session started, we started drafting the concept. And then this ground game started even before the session started to let people know that this bill was going to be around. And then throughout the whole legislative session, we were doing this ground game work. As in each of the points that Annalisa mentioned, how a bill becomes a law, every one of those, we would have concerted efforts around sending out action alerts, trying to get more people to sign up as letters of support, trying to get certain organizations to support, making sure that we were getting support from the entire state. So those were some of the things that we did to make sure that representatives and senators knew that this bill was important to people in Oregon.
Okay, I'm going to talk about advocating for a committee. So moving along in the process, your bill gets drafted, and then it ends up in a chamber, and the leader of that chamber, either the speaker or the Senate president, decides which committee to assign that bill to. And as we had talked about, there are a number of committees that it could go to, and they're kind of divided by topics. So natural resources, human services, education, those kinds of things. And so sometimes, but not always, there are actually multiple committees that a bill could slide into. And 320 was an example of that. So there was a rural communities committee as well as a business and labor committee. So the home baking bill was both about increasing food access in rural communities, and it was also a micro entrepreneur bill. And so it could kind of fit in either of those committees. And you are able to essentially lobby chamber leadership on which committee that you would like to see the bill end up on. And so there can be very strategic to put it in a certain committee. And one thing to look at, of course, is who's on that committee. So if you've done a good job getting a lot of sponsors, there is maybe there's a chance that all the members of the Rural Communities Committee have signed on as sponsors, and so it would be strategic to have the bill in that committee. So just know that that there's some strategy involved in what committee you end up with, and then you then want to make sure, if you haven't already, meet with every single member of that committee before you have your public hearing, and definitely before you have your work session. And that's just introducing them to the bill, going over any questions and concerns that they have. You want to walk into that public hearing, you want to walk into that work session, already knowing who's supportive and who's not. And for those that aren't supportive, knowing what you can do to move them to support. So once you've done that, you will be working with the chair of that committee to schedule your public hearing and work session. Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Spencer again to talk about providing testimony, and this happens during the public hearing portion.
Thanks, Annalisa. So So then once we had a committee and a hearing set up, we wanted to make sure that we had people to provide testimony on behalf of the bill to the committee. And so what we were looking for is, we already had this group of people that had said this was an issue that they were interested in, and we had supporters that were lined up from our ground game before the session. So we had a good pool of people to reach out to ask, is anyone interested in, testifying in front of the legislature on behalf of the bill? So we had some folks that responded like, yes, I would be interested in that. And what we were working with them was to, for one, we wanted to make sure that the folks that were providing testimony were personally affected by the issue. So they were going to be a home baker, and this was going to help them to launch their business, or their community has, seen a bakery is no longer delivering to the store in their community. So this is, a way that this could help increase access to baked goods in their community. We really wanted to make sure it wasn't just a general supporter. Not that those are bad, not that it's not helpful to have someone that's just a general supporter, but wanting to make sure that the testifiers that we brought were personally affected by the issue. And Annalisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but most committees, chairs have different interests in how many testifiers they want. So it's hard to say exactly, but we knew that it was like 3 or 4 that worked for the committees that our bill was in. So that was the sort of number one thing. The other thing that we were looking for was if the person was a constituent of either the committee chair, or if there was a member of the committee who we weren't sure if they were supportive or not. Perhaps this testifier could speak to that legislator directly as a constituent of that committee. And then, of course, willing and able to visit the Capitol. Committees are usually in the middle of the day on a weekday. People are working. A lot of the folks that would be affected by this bill live far away from the Capitol. So that was another sort of thing that we were looking at, is having somebody in person. We also provided written testimony, so we had people write testimony, and we submitted that as well. But it's much more impactful to have somebody actually there. And for one of the committees, one of our supporters, she lived, 300-400 miles from the Capitol, was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. She couldn't make it to the Capitol, but we worked, and this is probably different for every state legislator, but we worked to have them call in during the committee. And that was pretty, I think, impressive to the committee members. This was a rural Oregonian taking time out of their busy day to provide some testimony. So there was that option as well, but obviously in person is a little bit more impactful. And then before the actual committee hearing, we worked with the testifiers to make sure that they were comfortable and understood the big picture of the bill, but also the details that were laid out, so that just that we were all being consistent. And we encouraged them to write out their testimony beforehand. And then as far as when you're in a hearing, for the most part, the folks that we brought, this is the first time they'd ever been to the Capitol, let alone providing testimony in front of legislators. It can be kind of intimidating. So writing out the testimony beforehand is really helpful to just get everything written out, so it's not as, you're not up there just ad-libbing and then get flustered by the pressure of being in front of these legislators, even though they're working for you, not the other way around. But so the best thing is if we could have the testifier use their written testimony but not read it verbatim and just recite from that. The next best is just, if they were uncomfortable, just reading it straight through. And then, the least best way is to have someone just ad-libbing, because it's easy to go off track or to say something that maybe isn't in the bill, or start to talk about an issue that's unrelated, and it just leads to confusion. And so those are the things that we did to set up the folks that were testifying, set them up for success. So I think I'm going to pass it back to Annalisa. She's going to talk about the final stretch.
Okay, so you've provided excellent testimony. Things are looking really good. You then have your work session and Committee members are unanimous and they vote. You actually only need a majority of committee members to support a bill for it to pass out of committee successfully. So it passes out of committee and then heads to the floor of that chamber, which is again where every member of that chamber gets an opportunity to vote yay or nay on that bill. And you also then need a majority of legislators to vote in favor of it. So passes out of committee, heads to a floor vote, passes out of the floor. It will then head back over to the other chamber where it will go through that same whole process of public hearing, getting assigned to a committee, having a public hearing, having a work session, passing out of committee, headed to the floor, and then it heads to the governor's office where hopefully the governor will sign it. So we had unanimous support for SB 320, the home baking bill, in both of our committees, and we had, with the exception of one vote, nearly unanimous support in both chambers, and the governor then went ahead and signed the bill. So smashing success. So then, of course, the next step. So your bill passes. Does that mean you're done? It depends. So just for really quickly, your bill passes. When does it go into effect? So typically it goes into effect kind of January 1st of the next year, except if there is a emergency clause. So an emergency clause is something that legislators can attach to bills that will either say, I want it to go into effect immediately upon passage, or they can do any set of dates. So in 90 days after it's been signed, and 180 days after it's been signed. And this is, legislators have this ability to do this because there's sometimes when people, for whatever reason, the policy needs to go into effect more immediately than kind of January 1st of the following year. So there is also this process called rulemaking. So I don't know if any of you have ever read a bill, but the language can be pretty confusing. It's a lot of legalese. It's a lot of like referring to other sections of statute. So oftentimes, not every bill, but many bills have to go through a process called rulemaking. And rulemaking is where a bill gets assigned to a relevant state department. So SB 320 in this case got assigned to the Department of Agriculture, and that was because the Department of Agriculture oversees domestic kitchens licensing. And this was an exemption from the domestic kitchen license. And rulemaking is where you can go into some of the nitty-gritty, some of more detailed language you want around how this bill will get carried out. It's also an opportunity to put it into language that is just more accessible for folks who want to benefit from it, so on and so forth. So bills, which are now laws, get assigned to a state department. They create the rules. They often create these rules with input from stakeholders. And then there is a public comment period where the rules are released and advertise that they're released, and anyone can read them and then offer comment on them saying, yes, we agree with these rules, or no, we don't agree with these rules. There's a hearing where people can offer that comment in person. You can also offer it in writing. And then assuming there aren't, a ton of disagreement around the rules, and usually the State Department really works with stakeholders around rules, so there often isn't, but there sometimes can be. But assuming there isn't, it just goes into effect at the end of the public comment period. So talking about the home baking bill and where it is now. So we passed it at about a year, end of last year-ish, May, June, July of last year, and it went into effect in January 1st. We started working on rules with the Department of Agriculture in the fall, and that process has continued. And they actually just as of last week started the public comment period, and there will be a hearing at the end of April for it. And then we're hoping that it will be pretty smooth sailing throughout this process. We don't anticipate any kind of changes to the rules, and we worked closely with them and other stakeholders to develop them. And so we're hoping as of kind of beginning of May, that 320 rules will be done, and everything is wrapped up in a pretty little bow.
Just in time for farmers market season.
Just in time for farmers market season. Exactly.
Well, I want to thank our speakers, Amy, Annalise, and Spencer. Thank you so much. You've covered a lot of great detail here. We do have 15 minutes for questions. We've had a couple come in already, and so we'll start with those, and I'll be checking the chat box for more. So please submit your questions there, and we'll just get started right away with a few that are here. One is, when advocating for placement in a specific committee, is that lobbying or just asking for action on a policy decision? I think I'm going to turn that to you, Annalisa.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I would guess that I like to err on the side of assuming that it is lobbying, just for kind of tracking purposes. And we tend to want to be careful and make sure and count things as lobbying as opposed to not counting things as lobbying.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, another question is, how do you include low-income people in the process, and how do you ensure they benefit from the policy change? And I think I'm going to pass it to Amy, but if any of the other speakers want to weigh in, please feel free to.
All right, that is an excellent question, and one here at Oregon Food Bank that we're trying to reflect on more and more these days. So thank you for the question. So I would say there's kind of a wide variety of things that you could do to ensure that low-income people are included in your process, of all the way from obviously identifying issues that are affecting your community, potentially disproportionately affecting low-income people. So all the way from like kind of identifying the problem, but then also including low-income folks in your organizing, in your policy change efforts. So one thing I would say is to make sure that you have kind of a wide variety of actions available. So some folks, because of time limitations, because they may be working multiple jobs, because they might be juggling childcare issues, may want to be involved, but maybe can't take the whole day and go down to the Capitol for your big, high-value, lobby day or something like that. So making sure that there are options where folks can submit letters or folks could make phone calls, kind of ways to ensure that a wide variety of people can participate in the process. So that's kind of one thing. Secondly, you might want to be thinking about ways that you or your organizations could support more participation from a wide variety of people, including those who may be facing challenges due to low income. So, for example, if you're going to have a meeting to talk about the issue or to figure out your tactics for organizing, can you provide childcare? Can you give folks rides who may have trouble with public transit or affording the gas to get, across town or across counties to the meeting? And definitely, I think just, kind of fundamentally, oftentimes, it could just be as easy as being invitational, making sure that your flyers or your communication is going out to a wider audience, that you're not just, I think at one point Spencer said, make sure you're not just talking to staff of organizations, but allowing them to use their channels as well to cast a wide net. And then the only other thing I would say before passing it to Spencer, maybe he wants to talk about in general some things that he's done, but, also just making sure that lines of communication are open. So, for example, here at Oregon Food Bank, we're trying to pilot some different ideas such that we're getting more input from people visiting pantries on what are the challenges they face, like what issues, if we had some wins or policy changes on where they would really feel the win and that would make a difference in their lives. And so anyways, it's a question that I think you have to continually come back to and reevaluate time and time again to make sure that you're being inclusive and that you're putting folks who are most affected by the issues at the center so that they can be kind of drivers of both kind of what changes would make a difference, but then also active members in your coalition or organizing efforts.
I think you nailed it, Amy. I think the just to reiterate, with our feast organizing process is really designed to engage the whole community, and so I think the ease in getting folks to participate later on was that this wasn't an issue that we just created out of nowhere and then said, hey, please help support us. This was something that we knew that people were interested in. And so just starting from that place was really important. And then all of the things that Amy said around providing different ways for people to participate and to support, and easy ways like the action alerts or sign-on letters, those kinds of things, having it available in different locations, and maybe that, just having it, having there be lots of opportunities to participate was important. So.
Spencer, this next question I think will be for you. I think it's twofold. I think it's asking two different questions here, but one is, who lays the groundwork? Or who lays out the groundwork for the on the ground organizing? So was that something that we determined, or did these communities generate that? And then additionally, the question here is related to who did the outreach for the home baking bill? Was it feast communities? Were they able to delegate roles, etc.?
Great question. Yeah, I think this was the first time I'd ever worked on public policy organizing. So I had great support from our advocacy team here at Oregon Food Bank to kind of, they were really helpful in saying, these are the things that would be helpful to get this bill to pass. These are the tools that we have to help make that happen. And then, so I guess to say, as far as the structure of the ground game, that really came from us, from Oregon Food Bank. And then I reached out to a lot of our partners to, so we're a statewide organization, so I don't have, the clout or the connections to individuals in, say, a county in Eastern Oregon. But we have individuals that we work with either in organizing feast events or through our community food assessment process, who I could call and say, hey, here's these tools that we have in order to help this bill pass. Can you make sure, can you pass along this information into your community and get people to sign on? And so in that sense, the structure, we sort of provided the things that we thought were needed to happen in order to make the bill happen, and then leaned on our network of supporters throughout the state to do the organizing in their local community.
Great. All right, we have one more question. If there are any additional ones, please feel free to chat them in. I think I'm going to pose this one again to Amy. Question is, I would like to know more about mobilizing volunteers to help support an organizing effort.
Okay, thanks for the question. I'll start off, and then if my colleagues here want to chime in. But yes, a major challenge can obviously be, how do you mobilize others to join you in your effort? And so I'll just give kind of a few quick tips here. Obviously, there's a variety of ways which you can engage folks, but one thing that I would say that you might not think of right off the bat is just when you're in conversations with folks, or showing up at someone else's meeting to try to recruit volunteers for your effort, standing up and telling your story about why this issue matters to you, maybe what common values you think in the community would lead others to join you, and then being invitational and at the end, can really motivate others to join you if you lay out kind of why you're impassioned about the issue, and then why it matters others to join you, and kind of why the time is right. So that's one thing, making sure you tell your story to mobilize other people and motivate them. Also, find out like what the interest of the person is that wants to join you, like what's their underlying motivation. So, don't make any assumptions about why they want to be involved. Perhaps for some people, it might be a sense of justice about the issue. Others, it might be that they really like the sense of community and see other people motivated, and they want to be a part of that. Like, that's exciting to feel part of a community. Or for other people, it may be that the kinds of things you're doing is a great social outlet for them, and so they like being a part of it. So kind of knowing the interest of that individual or motivation can allow you to better connect them to opportunities within your organizing and tactics that would feel like a good fit, right? So maybe that person who's really involved because they like that connection to community, maybe the best task for them isn't stuffing envelopes in an office all by themselves. So, just kind of being acutely aware of, if possible, understanding who your volunteers are and why they want to be a part of the work. One of the other things is just having a variety of options or tasks. Again, that'll motivate a different variety of volunteers. And also, being aware of the leadership kind of potentiality of folks, and when someone does a small thing and maybe seeing how you might be able to challenge them to next time invite others to help them do that tactic, or to put some greater responsibility on folks who you feel like are on that kind of leadership track and able to they themselves be organizers and organizing others. And then finally, I would say don't forget with your volunteers to celebrate contributions and successes. That can continually motivate people to stay engaged and feel a part of the wins along the way. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay.
Thank you so much to our speakers, Amy, Annalisa, and Spencer, for the great content you shared. And thank you for the great questions that everyone posed. Just a note that Amy and I are working on a webinar on community organizing, so kind of a 201, and we'll really focus on more of that pre-work, and hopefully we'll address some of the questions that were posed during registration. Thank you so much for your time today. This webinar will be recorded and it will be up on our website at oregonfoodbank.org. And keep an eye out in your email inbox for a quick survey you can take to share with us your thoughts and help us shape the next webinar coming up in the next few months. Thanks so much. Have a good day.